My name is Violet, and I'm 32 years old. 3 years ago, I was the senior logistics manager at Megamart Distribution, one of the largest retail chains on the East Coast. I'd been with the company for 7 years, working my way up from a junior analyst position to essentially running the entire supply chain operation for our holiday season launches. I've always been the type of person who finds genuine satisfaction in solving complex problems. There's something deeply fulfilling about taking a chaotic mess of suppliers, warehouses, delivery routes, and inventory forecasts, and turning it into a seamless machine that delivers exactly what customers want, exactly when they want it. My colleagues used to joke that I had spreadsheets for my spreadsheets, and honestly they weren't wrong. I lived and breathed logistics. The thing about supply chain management is that it's like conducting an invisible orchestra. When everything works perfectly, nobody notices. But when something goes wrong, a delayed shipment, a warehouse backup, a routing error, suddenly everyone from the CEO to the customer service reps knows your name, and not in a good way. That's why I was obsessive about documentation, backup plans, and what I called controlled redundancy, having multiple ways to solve the same problem. Our company's biggest challenge every year was the holiday season. We're talking about a 4-month period from August through December that could make or break our entire fiscal year. Black Friday alone accounted for nearly 18% of our annual revenue. The logistics of managing that kind of volume spike, coordinating with over 300 suppliers, managing inventory across 47 distribution centers, and ensuring that every single item reached its destination on time, was like solving a 3-dimensional puzzle that changed every day. I'd spent the better part of 2 years designing and implementing what I called the Holiday Harmony System. It was my baby, my masterpiece. The system integrated real-time inventory tracking, predictive demand modeling, automated reorder triggers, and dynamic routing optimization. But the real genius was in the manual override protocols I'd built in, little backdoors that allowed for human intervention when the algorithms hit edge cases or unexpected scenarios. Those override codes were my secret sauce. I'd named them after my childhood pets. There was Whiskers_primary for the main inventory reset, Buddy_override for emergency routing changes, Princess_backup for supplier substitutions, and about 30 others. I know it sounds silly, but these weren't just random passwords. Each one triggered a specific sequence of operations that I'd programmed to handle the most complex scenarios that could arise during peak season. The system was so effective that our holiday season performance had improved by 43% over the previous 2 years. We'd gone from being the company's biggest headache to their biggest success story. The executive team loved showcasing our results in board meetings and industry conferences. That's when Naomi Lawson entered the picture. Naomi was hired as our new vice president of operations in September, just 2 months before the holiday season kicked into high gear. She came from a competitor, Trendmart, where she'd apparently worked some magic with their cost reduction initiatives. The company was excited about her track record. She'd supposedly saved Trendmart over $8 million in operational costs in just 18 months. My first impression of Naomi was actually quite positive. She was polished, articulate, and seemed genuinely interested in understanding our operations. She was probably around 38, with the kind of confident presence that made you want to impress her. During her first week, she scheduled one-on-one meetings with all the department heads, and when she met with me, she spent nearly 2 hours asking detailed questions about the Holiday Harmony System. "Violet, this is incredible work," she said, scrolling through my presentation slides. "The level of integration and automation you've achieved here is exactly what modern supply chain management should look like. I can see why your results have been so impressive." I felt that warm glow of recognition that every hardworking professional craves. Finally, someone in senior leadership who truly understood what I'd built. "I'm particularly interested in these manual override protocols," she continued. "That's forward-thinking design, building in human judgment points where pure automation might fail. Can you walk me through how those work?" I should have been more cautious. I should have noticed how she was taking notes on everything, how she asked for copies of documentation that should have been above her immediate need-to-know level. But I was so excited to finally have a leader who appreciated the technical complexity of what I'd created that I opened up completely. Over the next few weeks, Naomi made herself a constant presence in our department. She'd drop by my desk with questions about supplier relationships, inventory forecasting models, and system architecture. She attended our daily stand-up meetings and asked to be included in my weekly reports to senior management. She positioned it as wanting to get up to speed quickly, and ensuring proper executive oversight. At first, I was flattered by her attention. She'd often praise my work in front of other team members, saying things like, "Violet system is the backbone of our entire operation," and, "I don't know how we managed before we had this level of sophistication." She even mentioned in a department meeting that she was recommending me for a promotion to director level, which would have been a huge step up in both responsibility and compensation. But there were small things that started to bother me. She'd sometimes reference conversations we'd had as if they were her own insights. During a meeting with the executive team, I heard her explain some of the Holiday Harmony Systems features using almost exactly the same language I'd used when I'd explained them to her privately. When the CEO complimented her on the innovative approach, she accepted the praise without mentioning that I designed the system. I told myself I was being paranoid. Maybe that's just how management worked. They synthesized information from their team and presented it up the chain. Maybe I was being too sensitive about getting credit for my work. I should have trusted my instincts. The first red flag came in early October, about 3 weeks after Naomi's arrival. I'd been working on a critical integration with a new supplier who was going to handle about 15% of our holiday electronics inventory. It was a complex setup that required modifying several core algorithms in the Holiday Harmony system and creating new override protocols for their specific fulfillment requirements. I'd been putting in 12-hour days for a week straight, debugging code, testing scenarios, and coordinating with the supplier's technical team. The integration was scheduled to go live on a Friday, and I'd planned to work through the weekend to monitor the initial data flows and handle any issues that came up. That Thursday afternoon, Naomi called me into her office. "Violet, I've been thinking about the Henderson Electronics integration," she said, referring to our new supplier. "I'm going to have Marcus take over the final implementation and monitoring." Marcus was a junior analyst who'd been with the company for about 8 months. He was bright and eager, but he'd never worked on anything close to this level of complexity. "I'm not sure that's a good idea," I replied carefully. "The integration touches some pretty sensitive parts of the system architecture, and there are specific override sequences that need to be monitored during the initial rollout." "That's exactly why I want Marcus to handle it," Naomi said with a smile. "We need to start cross-training people on these processes. You can't be the only person who understands how everything works. What if you got hit by a bus tomorrow?" It was a reasonable point in principle, but the timing was terrible. 3 weeks before Black Friday was not the time to be training someone new on critical system modifications. "I understand the need for cross-training," I said, "but maybe we could start with some less time-sensitive projects? The holiday season is..." "Violet," Naomi interrupted, "I appreciate your dedication, but I need you to trust my judgment here. Marcus is capable, and this will be a great learning opportunity for him. You can supervise, of course, but I want him to take the lead." That weekend, I spent both days working alongside Marcus, essentially doing the integration myself while letting him observe and take notes. He was grateful for the guidance, but I could see he was overwhelmed by the complexity. By Sunday evening, we'd successfully completed the integration, but I'd basically done 2 people's jobs while teaching someone else how to do mine. The pattern continued over the following weeks. Naomi would assign my core responsibilities to other team members, always with the explanation that we needed to build broader capabilities and reduce single points of failure. In theory, these were sound management principles. In practice, it meant I was constantly training others while still being held accountable for the outcomes. The most frustrating part was that Naomi would present these decisions as if they were strategic initiatives she'd developed. In team meetings, she'd talk about her approach to cross-training and her philosophy of distributed responsibility. She'd reference successful implementations of these strategies at her previous company, making it sound like she was bringing cutting-edge management techniques to our supposedly outdated organization. Meanwhile, I was working longer hours than ever. I'd come in early to check on the systems before Marcus or the other junior analysts started their work, and I'd stay late to fix problems or complete tasks that hadn't been handled properly during the day. The irony was that in the name of reducing our dependence on me, Naomi had made everyone more dependent on me than ever. But the real escalation came when Naomi started taking credit for my work in more obvious ways. In mid-October, I'd identified a potential bottleneck in our West Coast distribution network that could have caused major delays during the Black Friday rush. I'd spent several days analyzing shipping patterns, warehouse capacity, and regional demand forecasts, and I developed a solution that involved temporarily rerouting certain products through our Denver facility. It was exactly the kind of proactive problem-solving that separated good logistics managers from great ones. I documented my analysis in a detailed report and sent it to Naomi for review before implementing the changes. 2 days later, Naomi presented her solution to the executive team. I wasn't invited to the meeting, but I heard about it from my colleague Jessica, who worked in strategic planning and had been there. Naomi really impressed everyone today, Jessica told me over coffee. She identified this potential bottleneck issue and had a complete solution ready to implement. The CEO called it exactly the kind of forward-thinking leadership we need. She's getting a reputation as a real problem solver. When I asked Naomi about it later, she brushed off my concerns. Violet, when I present solutions to the executive team, I'm presenting them on behalf of the entire department. Of course the work comes from my team. That's what being a manager means. I'm not going to stand up there and give a play-by-play of who did what. That would be micromanaging. She said it with such confidence that I almost believed her. Maybe I was being naive about corporate politics. Maybe this was just how things worked at the VP level. But then I started noticing other things. Naomi would arrive at the office around 9:30 a.m., usually with a coffee and a muffin from the expensive place down the street. She'd spend the first hour of her day checking her phone and making what sounded like personal calls. She'd take long lunches, sometimes disappearing for 2 hours at a time. She'd often leave by 5 p.m., even when the rest of us were staying late to handle holiday preparation crises. Meanwhile, she'd send emails at 10 p.m. and 6 a.m., not because she was working those hours, but because she was using delayed send to create the impression that she was always working. I figured this out when I noticed that her late-night emails often contained information that had been discussed in meetings earlier that day, but with slight modifications that suggested she'd written them hours before. The most infuriating thing was how she'd delegate urgent tasks to me with extremely short deadlines, then disappear for hours when I needed approval or guidance. She'd assign me a project on Tuesday that needed to be completed by Thursday, then be unreachable on Wednesday when I ran into complications that required her input. Then she'd act frustrated when I couldn't meet the deadline, saying things like, "I'm concerned about your time management, Violet," or, "We need to work on your prioritization skills." Other people in the department started to notice. Tom, one of our warehouse coordinators, pulled me aside one day and said, "I don't know how you're dealing with this. She's basically turned you into her personal assistant while taking credit for everything you do." But Tom, like most of my colleagues, was in no position to challenge a VP. And honestly, neither was I. Naomi had positioned herself as the face of our department's success, and senior management clearly saw her as a rising star. Meanwhile, I was increasingly viewed as just another team member working under exceptional leadership. The breaking point was still a week away, but I could feel it building. I was exhausted, frustrated, and starting to question whether I even wanted to continue working in an environment where my contributions were being systematically erased. The holiday harmony system was still running perfectly, but I was falling apart. The disaster happened on a Tuesday morning, exactly 2 weeks before Black Friday. I remember the date precisely, November 10th, because it was the day my entire professional world collapsed. I arrived at the office at 7 a.m., as had become my routine during the holiday preparation crunch. The holiday harmony system ran its main optimization cycles overnight, and I always wanted to review the results before the rest of the team arrived. It was my way of staying ahead of potential issues. That morning, something was wrong. The system dashboard showed normal status indicators, but the inventory allocation numbers didn't look right. Our Northeast distribution center was showing stock levels that were 30% higher than what my calculations suggested they should be, while our Midwest facility was running dangerously low on several key product categories. I dug deeper into the data and discovered that someone had manually overridden the system's automatic rebalancing protocols. The override had been executed at 11:47 p.m. the previous night, using the buddy_override code, one of my pet-named admin passwords that I'd explained to Naomi during our early meetings. The override had redirected nearly $2 million worth of inventory from our Midwest facility to the Northeast, apparently in response to a demand forecast that projected higher sales in the New York and Boston markets. The problem was that the forecast was based on data from 2019, before the pandemic had shifted population patterns and shopping behaviors. Using outdated models for current demand forecasting was exactly the kind of mistake that could cripple our entire operation. I immediately began working to reverse the override and restore the proper inventory distribution. It was a complex process that required coordinating with multiple warehouses, updating transportation schedules, and recalculating delivery routes for thousands of orders. I was deep in the work when Naomi arrived at 9:30, looking relaxed and carrying her usual expensive coffee. "Good morning, Violet," she said pleasantly. "How are we looking for the day?" "We have a problem," I replied, not looking up from my screen. "Someone executed a buddy_override last night that redistributed inventory based on outdated forecasting models. I'm working to fix it now, but it's going to take most of the day to fully resolve." There was a pause. When I glanced up, Naomi's expression had shifted from pleasant to concerned. "That's strange," she said. "I don't recall approving any manual overrides. Are you sure it wasn't an automated process?" "No, it was definitely manual. The system logs show it was executed using one of the admin codes at 11:47 p.m. The only people who have access to those codes are you, me, and the IT security team." Another pause. This time, Naomi looked genuinely confused. "Violet, I think there might be some misunderstanding. I don't have access to those override codes. You never shared them with me." I stared at her. "I walked you through all the override protocols 3 weeks ago. You took notes. You asked specifically about the pet names I'd used for the codes." "I remember you mentioning that you had manual override capabilities," Naomi said carefully, "but you never gave me the actual codes. I assumed that was information you kept restricted to yourself." The conversation was surreal. I felt like I was living in an alternate reality where documented conversations had never happened and detailed explanations had never been given. But I didn't have time to argue. The inventory redistribution was getting worse by the hour, and I needed to focus on fixing it. "Regardless of who did it," I said, "I need to reverse this override before it causes major problems. Can you let the executive team know that we might have some delivery delays while I rebalance the inventory?" "Of course," Naomi said. "Keep me updated on your progress." I spent the next 8 hours working frantically to undo the damage. The problem was that the override had triggered a cascade of automated responses throughout the system. Inventory that had been redirected to the Northeast had already been committed to specific orders. Transportation schedules had been automatically updated. Warehouse staff had begun physically relocating products based on the new allocations. By 6 p.m., I'd managed to restore about 60% of the proper inventory distribution, but the remaining 40% was going to require manual intervention at multiple facilities. I was looking at another all-night work session, and even then, we'd probably have delays on thousands of orders. I was updating Naomi on my progress when she asked the question that should have been my first warning. "Violet, are you absolutely certain you didn't execute this override yourself? I know you've been working long hours, and sometimes when we're tired, we make mistakes we don't remember." I looked at her incredulously. I would never use outdated forecasting models. The whole point of the Holiday Harmony system is to use real-time data for decision-making. Using 2019 data in 2021 is Logistics 101. You just don't do it. "I'm not questioning your expertise," Naomi said. "I'm just trying to understand how this happened. If you didn't do it, and I didn't do it, then who did?" The implication was clear. In her version of events, I was either lying about giving her the codes or I was lying about not executing the override myself. Either way, I was the problem. I worked until 3 a.m. that night, and I was back at my desk by 6 a.m. the next morning. By Wednesday afternoon, I'd managed to restore most of the proper inventory distribution, but the damage was significant. We were going to have delays on about 12,000 orders, and the cost of the emergency redistribution, overtime pay, expedited shipping, warehouse disruption, was going to be close to $400,000. I documented everything in a detailed incident report and submitted it to Naomi. I included system logs showing exactly when the override had been executed, copies of the outdated forecasting models that had been used, and a complete timeline of my remediation efforts. Thursday morning, I was called into a meeting with Naomi and Robert Martinez, our head of human resources. I assumed it was a post-incident review to discuss process improvements and make sure something like this never happened again. I was wrong. "Violet," Robert began, "we need to discuss a serious issue that's come to our attention. Naomi has reported that you executed an unauthorized system override on Monday night that has caused significant operational disruption and financial losses." I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. That's not what happened. I discovered the override Tuesday morning and spent 2 days fixing it. I submitted a complete incident report documenting everything. Yes, we've reviewed your report, Naomi said. And while we appreciate your efforts to remediate the situation, the fact remains that you're the only person with access to the override codes who could have executed this change. That's not true. I shared those codes with you 3 weeks ago during our system overview meeting. Violet, Naomi said gently, I understand you're under a lot of stress, but you never shared those codes with me. I've checked with IT, and the system logs show that the override was executed using your credentials from your workstation. I was speechless. Everything she was saying was technically true. The override had been executed using my credentials from my workstation, but it was also completely misleading. Of course it had been executed using my credentials. I'd shared those credentials with her so she could handle emergency situations when I wasn't available. And of course it had been executed from my workstation. She'd been using my computer regularly to access system documentation and run reports. This is insane, I said. You're accusing me of sabotaging my own system. Why would I do that? We're not speculating about motives, Robert said. We're dealing with facts. The facts are that an unauthorized override was executed using your credentials, it caused significant disruption and financial losses, and you're the person responsible for maintaining these systems. I'm responsible for maintaining the systems, I said, which is exactly why I would never use outdated forecasting models. I'm the person who designed the real-time data integration specifically to prevent this kind of error. The meeting went downhill from there. Every piece of evidence I presented was reinterpreted to support their narrative. My detailed incident report became proof that I was trying to cover up my mistake. My extensive documentation of the remediation efforts became evidence that I was overcomplicating the situation. My obvious expertise in the system became a reason to hold me to a higher standard of accountability. The final blow came when Naomi said, Violet, I've been concerned about your performance and attitude for several weeks now. You've seemed overwhelmed by your responsibilities, and you've been resistant to my efforts to cross-train other team members. I think the pressure of the holiday season may be affecting your judgment. My judgment? I said. I've been working 18-hour days to make sure everything runs smoothly. I've been training other people to do my job while still being held responsible for the outcomes. Violet, Robert interrupted. I think we need to take a step back here. Given the seriousness of this incident and the potential impact on our busiest sales period, we're going to place you on administrative leave pending a full investigation. Administrative leave. The words hit me like a physical blow. I was being suspended 2 weeks before Black Friday for fixing a problem that I hadn't caused. You can't do this, I said. I'm the only person who fully understands the holiday harmony system. If something goes wrong during Black Friday, you'll need me to fix it. That's exactly the problem, Naomi said. We can't have critical systems that depend on a single person. This incident has shown us that we need to diversify our capabilities. Marcus and the rest of the team are perfectly capable of handling the holiday operations. I looked at her, and in that moment, I understood everything. This wasn't about the override incident. This was about removing me from the equation so that she could take full credit for the holiday harmony system success. The incident had just given her the perfect excuse to do what she'd been planning all along. I'll need your badge and laptop, Robert said. You'll be contacted once the investigation is complete. As I packed up my personal items, I could see my colleagues watching from their desks. Most of them looked shocked and confused. Tom, the warehouse coordinator, actually stood up like he was going to say something, but then sat back down. I didn't blame him. Nobody was going to risk their own job to defend someone who'd just been accused of sabotaging the company's most important systems. I walked out of the building that I'd worked in for 7 years, carrying a box of personal belongings and my laptop bag. In the parking lot, I sat in my car for 20 minutes, trying to process what had just happened. Then I started planning my counterattack. That first night was the hardest. I sat in my apartment, staring at the ceiling, replaying every conversation I'd had with Naomi over the past 2 months. How had I been so naive? How had I let her manipulate me so completely? But by Friday morning, the initial shock and hurt had crystallized into something much more powerful. Cold, calculated determination. Naomi had made a critical error in her plan. She'd assumed that removing me from the office would eliminate the threat I posed to her narrative. What she hadn't considered was that I'd been documenting everything for years, and I had access to information that would be very difficult to explain away. My first step was to secure my evidence. Even though they'd taken my work laptop, I had copies of critical documents on my personal cloud storage. I'd been backing up important files to my personal account for years, not to steal company information, but because I'd seen too many colleagues lose weeks of work to hardware failures or IT glitches. It was a practice that violated company policy, but it was also going to save my career. I spent the weekend organizing everything chronologically and creating a comprehensive timeline of events. I had email threads showing Naomi requesting access to system documentation and override protocols. In one particularly damning exchange from 3 weeks earlier, she'd specifically asked me to walk her through the manual override process and to document the access codes for emergency situations. Screenshots of my system administration logs showing that I'd created a secondary admin account for her on October 15th, using the username n.lawsonandfredman. This account had been granted the same override privileges as my primary account. Detailed notes from our one-on-one meetings, including her questions about the Holiday Harmony system and my responses. I'd been keeping these notes in a personal journal app on my phone, documenting them immediately after each meeting. The notes from our October 8th meeting included a direct quote. Naomi asked for a complete overview of the manual override system, including the pet-named codes. I explained the full system architecture and provided her with access credentials. But my secret weapon was something Naomi didn't know existed. A complete audit trail of every system access and modification, automatically logged to a separate database that I'd set up during the system's development. This wasn't part of the standard IT logging system. It was my own monitoring tool, designed to help me troubleshoot issues and optimize performance. The audit trail showed everything. Every login, every override execution, every system modification, time-stamped and tied to specific user accounts. And it showed that the disastrous override on Monday night had been executed using Naomi's admin account, not mine. More damning still, it showed a pattern of Naomi accessing the system at odd hours over the past 2 weeks, often making small modifications or running reports during times when she was supposedly not in the office. She'd been using the system far more extensively than she'd admitted to anyone. But the most devastating piece of evidence was a series of system queries that Naomi had run on Sunday night, just hours before the override incident. She'd accessed the historical forecasting database and specifically pulled 2019 demand models for the Northeast region. The timestamps showed that she'd retrieved this outdated data, then used it to justify the inventory redistribution that had caused the crisis. This wasn't an accident or a mistake. This was deliberate sabotage, designed to create a crisis that would justify my removal. I spent Monday and Tuesday organizing all of this evidence into a comprehensive dossier. I created a minute-by-minute timeline of the override incident, cross-referenced with system logs, email timestamps, and access records. I included screenshots of every relevant system query, every database access, and every modification. I documented the financial impact of the incident, the remediation efforts I'd undertaken, and the ongoing risks to the holiday season operations. The document was 43 pages long and absolutely devastating. Anyone who read it would understand exactly what had happened and who was responsible. But I needed to be strategic about how I presented this information. Naomi had positioned herself as the department's star performer, and she had the trust of senior management. If I just sent my evidence to her boss, there was a good chance it would be dismissed as the desperate accusations of a disgruntled employee. I needed to find the right person to present this to. Someone with enough authority to conduct a real investigation and enough independence to evaluate the evidence objectively. That person turned out to be Elena Rodriguez, our chief financial officer. Elena had been with the company for 12 years, and she was known for her analytical approach to problem-solving and her intolerance for anything that threatened the company's financial performance. More importantly, she reported directly to the CEO and had no direct relationship with Naomi. I'd worked with Elena's team several times over the years on supply chain cost optimization projects, and she'd always been impressed with my analytical rigor. If anyone would take the time to review detailed evidence and draw logical conclusions, it would be Elena. I requested a meeting with her through her assistant, explaining that I had information about operational risks that could significantly impact the holiday season financial performance. I didn't mention the investigation or my administrative leave, I wanted to present this as a concerned employee bringing important information to senior leadership. Elena agreed to meet with me on Wednesday morning. I spent Tuesday evening preparing for what I knew would be the most important presentation of my career. I organized my evidence into a clear, logical narrative. I prepared for every possible objection or question. I rehearsed my key points until I could deliver them with confidence and precision. This was my one shot at justice. I wasn't going to waste it. Elena's office was on the executive floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. I'd only been there once before, during a cost optimization presentation 3 years earlier. This time, the stakes were infinitely higher. Elena greeted me with her characteristic directness. "Violet, I understand you have some concerns about operational risks. I have to tell you, I'm aware of your current administrative leave status, but I'm willing to hear what you have to say." "Thank you for meeting with me," I began. "I know my situation is unusual, but I have information that I believe threatens the company's financial performance during our most critical sales period." I opened my laptop and began walking through my evidence. Elena was the perfect audience, analytically minded, detail-oriented, and completely focused on data rather than personalities or politics. "Let me start with the timeline of events," I said, sharing my screen. "On Monday, November 8th, someone executed a manual override of our holiday harmony system using outdated forecasting models. This override redirected approximately $2 million in inventory and has created delays affecting 12,000 orders." Elena leaned forward, studying the timeline. "I read the initial incident report. The investigation concluded that you were responsible for the override." "That's what I need to discuss with you," I said. "I've conducted my own analysis of the evidence, and I believe the investigation reached the wrong conclusion." I walked her through the system logs, showing her the detailed audit trail that hadn't been included in the official investigation. I explained how the override had been executed using Naomi's admin account, not mine. I showed her the timestamps proving that Naomi had accessed the outdated forecasting data just hours before the incident. Elena's expression grew increasingly serious as she reviewed the evidence. "This is very different from what I was told about the incident. Why wasn't this information included in the original investigation?" "Because the investigation was conducted by the same person who executed the override," I said. "Naomi positioned herself as the injured party investigating my supposed mistake. She had complete control over what evidence was considered and how it was interpreted." I showed Elena the email threads documenting my explanations of the override system to Naomi. I walked her through the pattern of system access that proved Naomi had been using the holiday harmony system far more extensively than she'd admitted. But the secret weapon was the query log from Sunday night. Elena stared at the screen as I explained how Naomi had specifically accessed 2019 demand models for the Northeast region, then used that outdated data to justify the inventory redistribution. "This looks deliberate," Elena said quietly. "That's my conclusion as well," I replied. "I believe Naomi created this crisis intentionally to justify my removal and position herself as the sole expert on our supply chain operations." Elena was quiet for a long moment, studying the evidence. "Violet, if what you're showing me is accurate, this represents a serious breach of trust and potentially criminal behavior. Are you prepared to stand behind this analysis?" "Absolutely," I said. "Every piece of evidence I've shown you can be independently verified. The system logs, the email threads, the access records, it's all documented in multiple places." "I'm going to need copies of everything," Elena said. "And I'm going to need to conduct my own investigation immediately. If you're right about this, we have a much bigger problem than a logistics error." Elena scheduled an emergency meeting with the CEO and the head of legal for Thursday morning. She asked me to present my evidence to them directly, with the understanding that this would likely result in a formal investigation and potential legal action. Thursday morning, I found myself in the CEO's conference room, facing Marcus Weber, our CEO, Elena Rodriguez, CFO, and Jennifer Chen, our head of legal. It was the most intimidating audience I'd ever presented to, but I was ready. I walked them through the entire story, from Naomi's hiring to the override incident to my discovery of the evidence. I presented every piece of documentation methodically, explaining the technical details in language that non-technical executives could understand. The breakthrough moment came when I showed them the query log from Sunday night. Marcus leaned back in his chair and said, So you're telling me that she deliberately accessed outdated data, used it to justify a system override that she knew would cause problems, then blamed you for the resulting crisis? That's exactly what I'm telling you, I replied. Jennifer, our legal counsel, had been taking notes throughout the presentation. This is potentially criminal fraud, she said. If she deliberately caused financial harm to the company in order to advance her own position, we're looking at possible charges of embezzlement, fraud, and breach of fiduciary duty. Marcus turned to Elena. How quickly can we verify this evidence? I can have IT pull the system logs today, Elena replied. The email threads are all in the company system, so those can be verified immediately. The access records should be straightforward to confirm. Do it, Marcus said. And I want Naomi in here this afternoon. Don't tell her what this is about. Just get her here. The IT verification took 3 hours. By 2 p.m., Elena had confirmation that every piece of evidence I'd presented was accurate. The system logs matched my audit trail exactly. The email threads were authentic and complete. The access records proved that Naomi had been using the Holiday Harmony system extensively while denying having access to override capabilities. At 3 p.m., Naomi was called into the CEO's office. I wasn't present for that meeting, but Elena filled me in on the details later. Naomi had walked into the room expecting a routine update meeting. Instead, she found herself facing the CEO, CFO, and head of legal, with printed copies of system logs and email threads spread across the conference table. Marcus had opened the meeting by asking her to explain her role in the override incident. Naomi's confident facade crumbled within minutes. When confronted with the system logs showing her admin account executing the override, she first claimed ignorance, then blamed IT errors. But the evidence was overwhelming. I was trying to optimize operations, she finally admitted, voice shaking. The system seemed inefficient, and I thought I could improve it. By using 3-year-old data? Marcus's voice was ice cold. By deliberately sabotaging your own department and framing a dedicated employee? Jennifer informed Naomi that the company would be pursuing criminal charges for fraud and embezzlement. Security escorted her out within the hour. 2 weeks later, I was reinstated as senior logistics manager with a promotion to director level and a 40% salary increase. The Holiday Harmony system performed flawlessly during Black Friday, generating record-breaking results. Marcus personally apologized during a company-wide meeting, praising my integrity and technical expertise. Violet's dedication to truth and excellence represents the best of our company values, he announced. Naomi's scheme had backfired spectacularly. Instead of stealing credit for my work, she'd ended up highlighting my irreplaceable value to the organization. The system I'd built with such care had not only survived her attack, it had exposed her deception and secured my future. Sometimes the best revenge is simply letting the truth speak for itself.